right now we have over 100 trillion with a T, 100 trillion unfunded liabilities in this country.
Explain that, because I think, whenever you're listening to this, we have trillions and trillions of dollars of debt, and that's a lot of money. Like $1 trillion versus $1 billion.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Is insane. This is BetterWealth with Caleb Guilliams. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the BetterWealth Breakdown. And this is going to be a very, very special episode because we're going to be talking about Social Security, why it's a Ponzi scheme, and Dan has done hours of research and is going to be very, very exciting.
Yeah, this is very exciting. And we talk about how Social Security is a government-sponsored Ponzi scheme. It's crazy to just let that settle in for a second. And this is coming from a book I was reading called Managing Foundations and Charitable Trusts, which apparently a lot of people don't read, but we're doing a lot of research on charitable trusts and foundations and just charitable giving in general. And so I was reading this book and this section came up of Social Security is a government-sponsored Ponzi scheme.
And I have you trained and you're like, oh, this would be an amazing podcast.
It would be an amazing podcast episode. So, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about, Social Security, why it started, what the initial basics of that look like, what a Ponzi scheme is, how Social Security, the reasons why.
The 7 reasons.
The 7 reasons why Social Security is like a Ponzi scheme. The 3 reasons that makes it different from a private Ponzi scheme. And we're going to talk a little bit about, how this actually works. What does the future of, everybody's talking about 2035 and, the potential of it running out and how this all relates to life insurance of all things. Right. And then, what's the purpose of all this in the first place?
Right. We will land the plane. There will be some takeaways. But one of the first things, this video is not going to be about strategies about Social Security. But what I do want to take a step back is, what is Social Security? I can't even say it. So Social Security.
So Social Security started in 1935, and it was meant as basically a social safety net is the easiest way that we could talk about it. And in 1935, the average age expectancy was what?
It was 59.9, so 60. And then I think for women, it was like maybe 64. But you couldn't take it until the age 65. And so it really was that social net that it's like, okay, if you outlive your money, it would, kick in. But right now, so Social Security is like this retirement age and people are living way longer than normal.
Yeah. Well, so that's a great point, is like, it was never intended to do what we as Americans seem to be relying even more heavily now than ever thought, because you were never intended to actually take the benefit.
Think about it. When it was started, 1935, people died before the age of 65. Now, life expectancy is around 87, depending on who you talk to. And so that right there, just think about that as this episode progresses and as we look at where our country's at. Again, it's interesting that people can take this benefit at age 62.
Yeah, it's crazy. So I've got my notes here. I want to make sure that everything I'm saying is accurate. And so straight from Investopedia, a Ponzi scheme is a fraudulent investing scam which generates returns for earlier investors with money taken from later investors. This is similar to a pyramid scheme in that both are based on using new investors' funds to pay the earlier backers. So, Caleb, when you think of a Ponzi scheme, if somebody just came up to you and said, what's a Ponzi scheme? What would first come to mind? Who would first come to mind?
I mean, yeah. What's his name?
Bernie Madoff.
Yes, and like I just think of people, someone getting people in line, getting them very excited, but then ultimately the people at the end get the short end of the stick.
And when I was doing my research, I actually saw there was a guy with the last name of Stanford who actually ran the second largest Ponzi scheme right behind Bernie Madoff. And his happened all around the same time, but because Bernie's was so much bigger, he kind of lost the limelight. So it's interesting to start looking at. There's still a lot of these going on today, and do your due diligence and whatnot. But I want to talk about the 7 reasons why Social Security is like a Ponzi scheme. And the first reason is there's great returns for early investors. Mm-hmm. The second is it pays existing investors using funds from new investors. Mm-hmm. The third reason is lack of easy transparency. And the key word there is easy transparency. Is there's a lot of minutia of how this works and a lot of misinformation of what's going to happen. And so there really is, if you ask people what is Social Security, how does it work. Very
Mhm.
few would know and
Yep.
wouldn't really know where to look or
Right.
what the future holds with that. The fourth is misapplication of investor funds. And what that means is it's not actually invested to protect against inflation. And I'll explain later what I mean by that. And the fifth is funds invested with a related party.
Yeah, it's interesting. Where do they invest funds?
So they're actually invested in U.S. Treasuries.
Okay, so
in securities.
So it's like this entity is taking your money, paying out other people, and investing it with their own.
That's right.
Entity. Yeah, that sounds very much like a Ponzi scheme.
It's basically self-dealing. The sixth is the related party is unlikely to ever pay the funds back in real terms. And that relates to unfunded liabilities, which you love talking about. And we'll touch more on that later in this episode. And the seventh is no outside audit. Because what are you going to do? Say,
right.
That we need to audit you. Well, we could go at length on that. But so those are the 7 reasons. And if I just said those 7 things without saying it was Social Security, if you knew what a Ponzi scheme was, or even had the semblance of what one was, you would be like, that sounds like a Ponzi scheme.
100%.
And
no one would sign up for that. No way.
And so here's 3 interesting ways that Social Security is different from a privately run Ponzi scheme. And that these are what really are fascinating to me. The first is that the sponsor, the US government, can and does compel people to pay into it.
They make people pay into it.
You have to. How crazy is that? The second one is the sponsor has the ability, again, the sponsor of the US government, has the ability to simply print the money to pay the benefits. And that's what we're talking about with unfunded liabilities is...
It's worse than any Ponzi scheme.
Yeah.
Because, oh my God, yeah, continue.
And the third is, again, the US government, the sponsor of this, can and does change the rules in the middle of the game.
Yep. Are we talking like increase the age, they could decrease the payment, they could do whatever they want.
Almost everything can change about it.
You know, it's interesting because before we got in the studio, you told me that it's not considered a tax, it's considered a contribution, which is it's ironic because it's something that we will get in the future. But I think there's some people watching this or listening to this right now that go, I don't think I'm going to get Social Security.
Well, yeah, and a lot of people are like, so should I just take it as soon as possible? And again, this is not theory around when you should take it or you shouldn't take it or what have you. But yeah, what you said is, the contribution is 12.3%. And a lot of people think that they're paying Social Security tax. That's not actually true. The government says that because you are supposed to get a future benefit, and I say supposed to on purpose, that it's actually not a tax, it is a contribution.
Right.
And we talk about in life insurance is you are paying a contribution to your as a premium because the life insurance company has promised to pay some future benefit.
Yep.
So that's the same distinction you're not paying a tax to the insurance company, you're paying a contribution, a premium. And what's interesting is that what happens when you actually take Social Security? Then it's actually tax.
It's double tax.
So yes, I mean, it's not technically tax according to the government, but you're paying into something.
Oh yes, they're not saying that you're taxed on the front end.
Right. Most people just think of it as a tax. It essentially is, but the government likes to think of it as a contribution, and then your contribution is conveniently taxed on the back end, anyways. So this whole thing is just fascinating. It sounds like a lot of self-dealing, and so when we talk about life insurance, the insurance companies are required by good business practices and by law to make sound investments so that they can cover their future payouts.
Right.
The same entity that doesn't do any of this is telling them that by law they have to do that.
The other thing that I just want to point out is all the things that you talked about, and they have the government on their side to like throw you in jail if you don't pay them.
Yeah, I always say you never want to be on the side of United States government versus Guilliams like that. You never want to be in that predicament. And they will be in business way longer than any of us will, and have the resources to squash you. So I always say that the 3-letter agency I don't want to mess with is the IRS, and here we are. But so when we talk about this idea of not being able to have that future payment or be able to cover that, that's an unfunded liability.
Yeah.
So I started going down the rabbit hole. I'm like, okay, so how does this even work, right? Like there's the Social Security Trust and the Disability Income Trust. And those tend to just get wrapped into this idea of Social Security. And so what they do is you make a contribution unwillingly. And what do they do with that money? They actually turn around and buy U.S. Treasury securities.
That's ironic. So they're making you give them money, and then they're buying their own treasury security.
And what's fascinating is that they say that these treasury securities are backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. Does that not make you feel better?
Well, it's just more ironic.
Right now, we have over 100 trillion with a T, 100 trillion unfunded liabilities in this country.
Explain that, because I think, you know, whenever you're listening to this, we have trillions and trillions of dollars of debt, and that's a lot of money. Like $1 trillion versus $1 billion.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Is insane. We have over $100 trillion of unfunded liability, which means that we have future benefits, i.e., like Social Security and other things that we don't have the money for.
Yeah, and what this is saying is, you know, that we literally can't pay the bills that we have, you know, been invoiced for or future invoices for. And what's fascinating is that is more than all of the private wealth in this country. If you totaled up all of the private wealth in the United States, that still wouldn't cover the unfunded liability. So like, even if the government said, you know what, we're going to take everything, they still couldn't pay it. So it's like, why do they place rules for insurance companies, but they don't have to follow them themselves? And, you know, I saw that you pulled up the US debt clock. It's scary. I mean, these are huge, like unfathomable numbers.
And you can go to usdebtclock.org. You can see that the national debt at the time of this recording is over $27 trillion. And then you can go down and look at the interest paid, the US total debt, which is a lot more than $27 trillion. And it's pretty insane.
Yeah. So the question really is, what's the end result of all of this? You know, there's a lot of uncertainty around, is Social Security going to run out in 2035? What's going to happen? Who's going to, in Washington, who's going to make decisions to change things? And so I want to talk about what's actually going to start happening next year in 2021, is that Social Security will actually start drawing down from these trusts, and which is basically the reserves to help pay for the benefits. There's about almost $3 trillion. So we're talking in context of over 100 trillion. You know, Social Security, the trusts have about $3 trillion in them. And the problem is, in 2019, they only earned 2.2%, these securities, which is not keeping up with inflation
or the printing of money.
Yeah. So it's like, how do we solve this problem? Well, you know, we could increase, taxes. We could print more money, which tends to be
if you've come to the conclusion that, taxes aren't going up, I don't know what to tell you, but I think if you look at where a country's going, this is just one program out of many that are not doing so hot when it comes to the financials. And what are we going to do? I want to sideline the economic talk as if raising taxes is a good idea, because not everyone running our country understands economics. But it's like, what is the U.S. going to be doing that all the other countries have been doing? Probably raising taxes or changing the benefit. But I will say, if you are nearing retirement, I do not think the U.S. government can take away this program because so many people rely on it. So I'm not making any predictions, but what I don't want this video to be is fear and say, Social Security won't be around. It will be around. I don't know what it will look like though.
Well, right. And so to ease your fears, what I think is going to happen, and this is coming from the Government Accountability Office, is that by 2035,
the government, another irony.
Right, the GAO. What's most likely to happen is, if nothing else changes, if no policymakers make any law changes, nothing happens to the plans, they're going to spend down these trust reserves, that $3 trillion, and that's what's going to last to about 2035, and that's where Social Security is going to run out. That's what people keep saying. But the asterisk there is that we still have a workforce.
Yes,
and because we have this amazing government-sponsored Ponzi scheme, there's still people that are paying into their contribution into Social Security, which is going to continue to fund this. But based on 2019 numbers, so this doesn't include COVID this year, what will be reduced is the Social Security benefit to about 79%. And so what I mean by that is the current workforce, at least in 2019, could support about 79% of the liabilities that Social Security has to pay out. So again, I just want to make that real simple. They're going to pay down the trusts, and then there will be a gap of about 20 to 25% of what they say they can owe, or they say what they say they owe and are going to pay out, and what the workforce can cover. So there's that gap that needs to be covered through something else, like potentially printing more money, like potentially raising taxes. There's a lot of different ways that can go. But my question is, what are those low hanging fruit? Almost everybody we talk to, actually, I don't think anybody has said they think the taxes are going to go down. And so the question is, where's that going to come from? Is it going to come from income? Is it going to come from qualified plans? Is it going to come from something else? And to me, the low hanging fruit is the money that's already technically in control, which is qualified plans.
I don't want to be too controversial on this video, but the reality is this: anytime you're in a qualified plan with the U.S. government, there could be a change that's made, and the U.S. government, and I just find it super ironic that they're keeping themselves accountable, is not doing so well when it comes to their money. And so, regardless of what that looks like, have that mindset, and don't be a fool and just go along and then be surprised in 20 years when some rule changes, because, and in all fairness, things need to change.
Totally.
And so, I mean, if I'm glad I'm not in the position of having to make tough decisions, but I just go back to what was the original intention. And if people weren't even living, or the average age or life expectancy wasn't over 65, then this wasn't a program that people should do financial planning around.
Right.
We have a whole sector of our business of helping people maximize this benefit. And again, it's great, but I don't think that's what it was intended for. And I think we're going to have some problems on our hand.
Well, the other thing that they could do is reduce spending.
Shocker.
Wouldn't that be a novel concept?
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to happen. But and again, this isn't a doom and gloom. We tend sometimes to get excited about some of these things. But really, for me, it's like, what could you start doing differently? What could you think about a little differently? And like start planning your financial future so that you don't have to rely on Social Security. That really should be, in my opinion, what this is all about. Is there's things you can do today and not have to worry about the social safety net. And if it's there, amazing. You've got extra cash in your pocket. And if not, you're going to be fine too. And that's really the matter here is like, with a program like this, with this scheme, we really have no control over it. That's at the end of the day. And what do we talk about all the time? Control. And so this really is a call to action to take control of your life and your finances and make it so that Social Security is just icing on the cake.
I love it. Thank you so much for doing the research. If you like these kind of videos, let us know, because we are continuing to try to innovate, and we want to share message. I know this was kind of a different type of message, but we want to share this message, just like you said, intentional living, control, really understand how that relates to in the context of time. So take care, be well, continue to live intentionally. Thank you so much for listening to the BetterWealth podcast. It would mean the world to me if you could hit subscribe, leave a review, and share this with the people that you know and love.